years of theology. Like, for example, have you read the four cosmological arguments that Aquinas makes for the existence of
God? It literally doesn't matter unless the basis of the religion is objective.
There's your answer. What you do is you take...
Have you read any of the texts that I've referenced?
No.
But I'm not particularly interested in Aquinas because I've already studied Christendom.
Okay. Well, you haven't studied Christendom if you haven't studied Aquinas. But here's the point. You take what, this deity and superficial and this and that, and you obfuscate the reality. You don't want to grapple. I mean, you yourself say that you don't care if we can even prove that God exists. You don't even care if God does exist. You don't even care, you said in one video, if you went to hell. And I just don't understand how a serious person could look at somebody who doesn't even care. And by the way, this is such a fraud to say, I don't care if I'm burning in hell for eternity. It's inconsequential to me whether the preeminent, pure actuality exists in the universe. And then to argue and say, well, I'm going to be objective about this conversation. You've already admitted that it's irrelevant to you. And then you turn around and you use Christian texts against Christians. You talk about, Jewish tricks. Talk about Jewish tricks where you obfuscate the entire Bible, you obfuscate this and that. We still have not come up with an argument for morality that you seek to impose. You seem to have problems with things that the church fathers have done or hypocrisies, and yet no standard by which to say that they're
all right, guys, let's move on. Original ad hominem doesn't work. You resort to, it's
not an ad hominem. It's not an ad hominem. It's simply to say that I simply don't understand. A personal attack would be like your hair is dumb. But I'm saying
the entire basis of your religion cannot be objective. You don't even know its history. You don't even understand.
Of course we do. Of course we understand the historicity. Look, I'm sure you pulled all these arguments from the Zeitgeist film.
Aquinas, living 1,000 years ago, didn't even know the Dead Sea Scrolls existed. Why do his arguments make that much sense? He didn't.
Irrelevant.
All right, guys. Hey, let's move on. Let's move on. Because you guys fundamentally disagree, and that's not going to change. But what all three of us have in common is the good old U.S. of A. Nick, why is Christianity essential to the future of the United States?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's pretty simple. If we want to be a moral nation, if we want to have a nation that makes sense again, we have to embrace Christianity. And look at the threats that we are under fire from. We're under fire from moral relativism, from the cultural Marxists. We're under assault. They say that gender doesn't exist. They say that, the sexuality is doesn't mean anything. It's all fluid. It's all this and that. Marriage is under fire. The family is under fire. And look, you can mount consequentialist arguments against those assaults. And you could say, well, here's why we can demonstrate pragmatically why families are better and men should be men and women should be women and X, Y, and Z. We could attempt to do that, but all of it will ultimately fall flat because there's no authority in those arguments. You look at what is being undermined in the United States, and it's the very foundation of why we're here. It's a very foundation of the nature of degrees to get into a Thomistic argument. But fundamentally, look at what we're at assault at. It's not just immigration. It's not just, tax policy. It's an assault on what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a nation. And how are we going to carry that out if we don't have strong families? And the only institution that can answer that authoritatively is the church. You may be able to answer that with a report from the Heritage Foundation or a personal belief, but you cannot say that this is the truth indisputably like Christians can. So in that way, it is completely indispensable in the restoration of the country.
Sticks.
All right, not to delve into an atheistic argument, but I can literally claim objective truth on virtually any spiritual statement that I make as long as no negative can be proven. Look, pagans had the nuclear family, the concept of morality, the tribal, the proto-nation state / nation state mentality long before Christianity exists. Pagans, thousands of years beforehand, managed to run stable cultures that lasted sometimes thousands of years uninterrupted. They they weren't screwing everything that moved, other than the Greeks, generally speaking. They had that problem. They weren't screwing everything that moved. They had a nuclear family, especially in Northern European groups. They had virtually everything that Nick is talking about wanting. Why then should Christianity, unless you, again, are making that, hey, it's just the objective truth argument that I don't have to take seriously. Unless you are making that claim, why wouldn't paganism do just as good a job? And some of these pagan cultures, by the way, they lasted so long, they lasted longer than any of the Christian empires so far. I think, isn't the United States approaching the point at which will be the longest lasting? And we were formed by deists, and we're falling away from that sort of a hyper-Christian mentality anyway.
Lots of claims being made, lots of claims being made. But again, the argument is that there is no way that you can authoritatively say that one mode of living is better than the other. And you could say, well, I'm objectively true and this and that. And you could say, well, because we believe in the thunder god, or, whatever your deity is, your pagan deity. The fact of the matter is people do not believe in them. There is not theology behind this. There is not historicity behind this. To draw this false equivalence between Christendom, which you have, again, thousands of years, the scholarship that has been done, and people have believed, and there is a heritage of this in this country. To speak simply on pragmatic grounds, who do you think can come and convince people that they are objectively correct about the family? Somebody who says, hello, Americans, I am a Christian, and the Christianity says this, that, and the other, and this is true. Or somebody who says, hello, I praise Odin, I am here with the hammer, and I say that the pagan family is back. And additionally, you conveniently leave out the point where the Roman Empire, as successful as it was, it had infanticide. It had gladiator fights. It had horrible injustices that were being committed. Even the charity that was being done during Roman times was not done for the sake of, well, we should help each other out and we should have real community. It was done because, well, I want to showcase my liberality and maybe I want a debt paid later. So again, to this false equivalence that's drawn between paganism and Christianity, it can only exist in this abstract universe, absent the practicality, absent the reality of the situation.
Again, that is a subjective claim. I would point out that the Roman Empire persisted in such practices well into the Christian period. They continued to enslave and butcher people. It was a politicized religion. Catholicism was born literally out of the political Romanization of primordial Christendom. That's fine. That's all well and good. What I'm saying is that there's no more objective a basis of that, and simply saying, well, people will be taken more seriously if they say we're going to restore our nation with Christianity.
All right.
I don't know. Number one, it probably depends on who you actually talk to. And number two, that's a bandwagon fallacy. Who cares? China, it's very fashionable in China to be a spiritualist or a Buddhist or to just be a hardline atheist. That doesn't make one of those paths right.
Well, Sticks, I would ask you.
If narrow is the way that leads to heaven, why does it matter if it's a popularity contest?
Well, I didn't say it would be a popularity contest. I said if we're talking about restoring morals and you saying, well, how is your objective thing better than the other? If we're talking purely in terms of a consequentialist lens, that would give you more credibility. But we believe it because it's the truth. I would ask you, if you're talking about pagan religions, which are interchangeable, can you give me an example of a pagan religion which could restore traditional values in the country, which has a convincing theology, a convincing metaphysics that we could start preaching? Is there one that...
Considering the similarity of holidays and the similarity of imagery and practice, virtually any of them from Northern Europe. Of course, you could have Norse.
So which one?
Norse paganism would be fine. Anglo-Saxon paganism. What I would say, though, this is what I've been saying. I wouldn't even want to use them as that objective method. We're getting, I think, hooked up here a little bit on the concept that there has to even be an objective measure for that morality. I am simply saying it's okay for people to be spiritual, including Christian. By the way, I don't fear Christians. I don't, as you think, hate Christianity in a general sense. What I am saying is that Christianity has shown itself, its track record in the last few hundred years is towards the same decadence and decay that you see in the culture. It's not the absence of Christianity that's causing it any more than the presence. It is simply the fact that Christians are capable of being corrupted the same way because your God does not objectively exist.
But aren't you moving the goalposts a little bit? I mean, no. You started out by saying, well, what makes your religion? If we're going to establish an objective morality, then anyone can, but I don't even care about it. And then you just followed up by saying, well, but I don't even care about it.
That's because that's the claim that you made. So I was just responding to your claim of objectivity. Well, this is the one objective.
Well, and you answered, and by the way, you answered with the religion. But you answered it with, does Norse mythology, riddle me this, my friend.
If you ask a question, I'm going to answer it. Yeah, it's the way it works.
Norse mythology, does this have a convincing metaphysics? Can you metaphysically demonstrate the existence of tribal Norse gods? Where's the proof for that, as opposed to the proofs that have been laid out by Christian apologists for thousands of years?
There's Christian apologists have laid out proof that is convincing to people that are Christians and not convincing to people that aren't, or everyone would be a Christian. The Muslims literally claim the same friggin' thing.
You yourself said you didn't read the apologists.
The same thing.
You yourself said, wait, they create an apologism that isn't convincing to non-Christians. And you yourself said, not only have you not read the premier apologist, but you don't care what he wrote. So that's kind of an interesting
I am saying that the entire world would have converted by now because of the fervor of Christian missionary activity.
Not if they don't read.
Objectively convincing.
Not if they don't read.
Objectively, it's convincing, yes.
Okay, great. Great, guys, we're moving on.
That's like saying that if I read spiritual, no, I've got to answer this.
Okay.
I could claim the same objectivity and say, well, a lot of people became occultists and theosophists and all these related new age sort of groups in the eugenics period, including a great many Christians. They became a bunch of mystics. I'm not sure whether many Christians realize that their great grandparents probably practiced black magic. That certainly happened, not just in the US, but in Europe. That doesn't make the arguments objective, and it doesn't make it true. You could even use the same bandwagon appeal. Became a bunch of Christian mystics, hundreds of millions of people.
I'm not making the bandwagon argument. That was one argument that was made, but the fact remains that, again, you shift the goalpost. First, you say there is no objective. You make a false equivalency between paganism and Christianity, of which there's no. I asked you, is there a convincing metaphysics? Is there anything comparable to Christianity? And you twist it on a dime and completely avoid it, because the answer is no. And here's the difference between Christianity and other religions. Christ was prophesized. There were 456 prophecies for Christ. If God was going to send a savior, he would tell us he was coming, and he did almost 500 times. And Christ affirmed all of those things. And we had 2,000 years of Christendom. We have a metaphysical foundation, a convincing one that has not so far been refuted. And you say, well, how is that any different than the cult of Mithras or the cult of Horus, of which none of these things exist for those religions? So it just strikes me as just disingenuous that you would draw any kind of convincing parallel between the two.
They're parallel because those prophecies that you're referring to also, in many cases, not always, but in many cases, overlap with other religious figures too. You could talk about Krishna. Horus would be one. Krishna is probably the closest you could think of. That doesn't make them real. It doesn't make them real figures. In many cases, Christians look at the Bible and say, well, that part is a metaphor. This part's symbolic in some way. It's the rock is actually Peter. Well, okay. How do you come around at that actual conclusion? There are Christians who disagree with you. But I mean, at this point, we're just splitting hairs a little bit.
No. That's two different things. The difference that distinguishes Christ from others. Well, because you started out by saying, well, there were other prophecies and that doesn't matter. And then you got into, and anyways, people have this literal versus figurative interpretation, which is a separate argument. To address the first point,
the interpretation for pragmatic purposes.
Okay, but these are two different arguments.
We're talking about we're having two slightly different conversations at this point, it seems. On the one hand, we're arguing theology. On another, we're arguing the application of that theology in a pragmatic sense. What I am saying, for the political purpose of a state, it doesn't particularly matter which religion is used. Gear it towards pragmatism. Where exactly would the difference be in morality between Christians and pagans? Why were the pagans able to thus be moral even by Christian standards? Meanwhile, the early Christians in some of those middle-aged kingdoms were slaughtering people. They practiced infanticide, cannibalism at times, incest. They had orgies. There were popes that had orgies. Sure. I think it was the Joust of the Whores, if I remember correctly, if indeed that tale is true. What I'm saying is that it is in spite of that religious belief system that all of these things still can occur. Installing Christianity as a sort of state religion isn't going to change that.
Well, nobody's talking about that. But in the first place, you seem to be really running away from the prophecies, because this is really where it falls apart, where there is no equivalent to Christianity. No, I didn't say this proves Christ. I said this proves why Christ is exceptional, why this religion is exceptional when compared with others, pagans, Eastern religions. This is why it's exceptional, because there is documented in ancient texts these prophecies that the Savior of mankind would have X, Y, and Z, that he would be born in Nazareth, he would be born in a manger, X, Y, and Z. There's 456 of these, and that's why we study him. That's why he's exceptional.
And that makes sense in propping up.
Wait, come on, my guy. I'll let you finish. I'll let you
props up your theology.
And
that story.
And then you argue, and then your argument is, oh, well, you say that because Christians were bad, that is the same as saying that it doesn't matter if there is an objective moral right and wrong, which is a very big difference. Hey, listen, again, you have this big problem with interrupting. I didn't interrupt you. The problem is this. What you have during the Middle Ages, even when you had popes who were doing orgies, even when you had Christians who were doing bad things, here's the difference. Christian doctrine said this is wrong, and that's the big difference. This is a difference that matters. Pagans, they may have by accident lived up to Christian standards, but there was no rule saying this.
Oh, yes, there was.
This is objectively not one that was built upon the same foundation that Christianity is. And so to say, and maybe they said it was, maybe it didn't, but the point is that you have an objective morality and it be based on the one true religion. But beside the point, it's very different to say Christians were misbehaving than to say that Christian doctrine is not true or not important. The reason that you can say that Catholic bishops were wrong, and by the way, the scandal in the Catholic Church, the rate of abuse in the Catholic Church is equal or lower than rates of abuse in other institutions in the world. That's a fact. But number two, to even use the vocabulary to say that those things were wrong, you have to have an objective standard of right and wrong. Otherwise, you're just saying, well, I find it personally distasteful, and you just have a personal problem with it. But the thing is that we Catholics or Christians can say, well, they did something wrong, and there will be a punishment for them, because regardless of what fallible men do, the doctrine is the same, and it's protected from error. So again, these are like rookie mistakes all over the board.
That was believed in by the pagans as well. You keep going back to the idea of, well, I'm right because I say so. I'm right because Aquinas said so 1,000 years ago. That is a subjective argument. You can point to prophecies, which I dispute. You can point to abuse rates, which I dispute. That doesn't really matter, though. It ultimately doesn't matter. Ultimately, you can't even come around to one single interpretation of the doctrine.
Sure we can.
Yes, there are protections. There are absolutely protections against things like infanticide and rape within paganism. Absolutely. It's not some fluff bunny.
Yo, Nick, chill out. Nick, Sticks will finish. Sticks is going to finish, and then we're going to move on to the next question.
Where were you when he was interrupting me, big guy?
Dude, you both get like 3 or 4 minutes each.
All right,
you know what I mean? You guys got plenty of time.
So
dude, come on. All right, so Sticks, close this out, and then we'll move on to the next question.
We can go on to the next question.
All right, cool. Sticks, is the United States a Christian country? Should it remain so?
It was founded as a deistic, secularized Christian nation, and it should remain that way, yes.
Nick?
It doesn't matter, to follow up, it doesn't matter if paganism becomes some sort of state religion either. It's got to be secularized at the state level.
It's just simply not true. I have to laugh when people say that America is not a Christian nation. And you have to define, well, what is a nation? I think if you're abiding by the interpretation that a nation's rhetoric is what a nation is, then I think there's a good argument you could make that the rhetoric of the American founding, or maybe the basis of the American political economy, was built on deistic, albeit Christian-inspired deistic principles. But if we define a nation as the composition of the nation, which is its people and its institutions, the nation at the founding was Christian. Maybe in the Declaration of Independence, they said by our Creator instead of the Christian God explicitly, and maybe they didn't make reference to it in the rhetoric of the founding documents, but the nation was nearly 100% Christian, nearly 100%. They occupied religious institutions. The church was a big part of the settlement. I mean, look at the first founders at Plymouth in the 17th century. I mean, who were these people but religious separatists, but people who went to form a Puritan religious community? So the idea that America was never a Christian country is just a laughable argument. It's one that you have to stretch and you have to bend the interpretation. You have to play with the language. And I get where the deistic argument comes from. Again, it comes from, Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who said he was a primitive Christian, even though they opened up the constitutional conventions with Christian prayers, et cetera, et cetera. These are minor details. You can make that argument maybe. But the composition of the country, the nation is its people. The people were Christian. The institutions were Christian.
Sticks, do you have a response?
I would say that as a follow-up to that, one can pray to the Christian God, hold them to be even self-evident without believing in the concept of the establishment of a organized religion. That is, the founders differ from you in the sense that you believe that a central authority is needed to mete out spirituality. Largely, they refuted this argument in the most directive terms. Not just Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. You would have been hard-pressed, I think, to find many of them who are religious to the point of wanting to subjugate themselves. In many cases, people came specifically to this hemisphere to get away from that concept. I would also point out as a historical note, Roanoke actually comes first and was not established for religious reasons.
Okay, but again, you are not answering you fell right into the fallacy that I laid out, which is you can argue that, well, the framers weren't devout
deists.
Christians. Okay, yeah, and you can make that argument, but that does not change the fact. Okay, but that does not, you could say organized religion is Catholicism, but Christianity is organized religion. They went to church. Okay,
Religion
and they
is
were
not
Christian,
the same
and the people were devout. What's that?
Religion and theism are two separate things. So is spirituality. I'm spiritual.
Let me ask you this.
But I'm not religious.
Let me ask you this. Were the 97% of the Americans at the time of the first census in 1790, the 97% who identified as Protestant Christian, were they deists or were they Protestant Christians?
The many were deists, especially those who were part of that literate Enlightenment mentality.
That's just simply not true.
Absolutely true.
That is simply contrary.
I can read books that they wrote.
All right.
I edit them.
And you can look where they prayed. Why would they pray to a God that they didn't think mattered?
I could pray to God right now. It doesn't mean I'm a member of some Christian congregation.
Communal prayer?
You
Interesting.
could pray right now and never go to church.
You guys fundamentally disagree on this, but again,
I think
USA.
everybody knows that it's
USA, right?
bogus.
It's
Common ground,
not-
USA, right? I just pointed there. And this is a relevant question to a lot of things going on today. We'll start with Nick on this one. Are Christians being discriminated against in the United States?
Of course they are. Of course they are. You look at any kind of push by the left, whether it was gay marriage, whether it's gun control. Look at the people that comprise the NRA. It's white Christian men. I mean, you look at any of the assaults by abortion, on and on, the transgender stuff. Most of it amounts to an attack on Christianity. And this goes back a long time, by the way, when they tried to get God out of the schools, when they tried to get God out of the curriculum, and they got God out of television. Of course, they're under assault. I mean, these are the people that are made fun of. These are the people that are laughed at. You know, how many different cartoons and things where they attack Christians? And you could say they attack others, but I mean, the others were not the founders of the country. The others were not represented in the country. So of course they are. They're not afforded the same special treatment as Jews or Muslims or Sikhs or anybody else. Of course. And I think Styx might agree with that.
Yeah, I would actually agree with him on this one. Christians have been maltreated recently, especially. I would go further and say other groups have been as well, but I don't want to see Christians censored. I don't want to see Christians mistreated. And I think
our guy.
Yeah, at this point, the nation has become more and more abusive towards anyone with what might be seen of as yesteryear's morality, like traditionalist in the 50s sense, especially. So Christians take the brunt of that.
All right, great.
Something we can agree on.
Yeah, that's awesome. We all have common ground in the US of A. That's what I figured. You guys disagree so much, but we do have this common ground. Speaking of which,
we can talk with each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I enjoy it. Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy fun. I've been hosting this thing, but I've been just like this the whole time. Like, wow, this is unreal. I'm learning so much, and it's just so much fun.